Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle, the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and Harry is still on his little hiatus, but I've been joined by one of the Buff's, I think probably the Buff's most celebrated big brain smart head. And we'll get to him in just a second, but before we do that, the heart and soul of the Buff the heart and soul are our great listeners, our listeners that have vaulted us to a global top 10% podcast. We are at bufnagle at bufnagle.com. Please feel to reach us there whenever you would like. Remember, share the love, share the buff, give us a 5-star review, hit like, smiley stars. You know the spiel, all right? Tell a friend to listen. You will get a free episode. And if you would like to support us, remember, in the show notes, there is a little link. You can buy me a coffee, which will probably turn into, I don't know, maybe a candy bar or something like that for me, because I don't drink a lot of coffee. But we have today with us, it's been a while since he's been on, but we are once again overjoyed to be joined by none other than Bob Luzenski, America's favorite rocket scientist. Bob, how are you tonight?
Rafe, as always, I am more than happy to be here in the Bufnagle virtual recording studio, recording yet another episode of the podcast. And I have to say, I'm quite honored. I mean, I knew I was a frequent guest, but I didn't know I was also a celebrated frequent guest.
Well, we do have celebrations, even though you're not around sometimes. We celebrate you,
okay.
whether you know
Fair
it or
enough.
not, whether you can feel the vibe. Okay, so we are recording this. As Harry and I did before I went to summer school in Europe in July and August. We recorded a bunch of episodes prior to that, and I'm about to take another short journey to completely like as far away. I don't think you can get a lot farther away and stay on land. I'll have to check that out. But I'm going to New Zealand actually tomorrow to visit Zach, and we want to have this episode in the can so it can drop while we're away, and it can, the magic of recording and things like that. So today is the 20-something. What is today?
23rd.
23rd of September.
It is the first full day of autumn.
Autumn, yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I did recognize that yesterday was the equinox, but I think it happened before it was early morning Eastern time, right?
It certainly happened before I got up out of bed.
Yes.
But I've been known to stay in bed quite late.
Yeah. So the days are still getting shorter, but the rate at which they're getting shorter is actually slowing down now.
Yes, it is. That's yes. When you take the derivative of the sine wave, you get the sine wave, and
we're now on the bottom part.
But yes, but it's still getting darker. So now we're in the half of the year where the sunlight is less than the daylight, sadly.
Yeah. But we'll get to the end of the year. We'll get to the winter solstice, and then we'll zip back up into spring. So
it happens every year,
and that has been happening for a long time.
Long time.
But what hasn't been happening for a long time is the human race has not been going into space for a very long time. It's been only the last 50 years or so, give or take, 60.
Yes.
Something like that. And there's a thing going on in space that is getting a lot of news about people being stranded or stuck or rockets not making it or coming back. You are here tonight, Bob. Your mission,
yes,
should you choose to accept it, is to clear the slate, make sure we know what's going on with these astronauts, with the rockets, Starliners, and things like that. So what's going on?
Okay, that's a tall order, and we have talked before about whether I should do an episode about this topic, and at the time you asked the question previously, it was still all very much up in the air, and I
No
didn't.
pun intended.
No, well, up in space, actually,
Above the
not
air,
so
yes,
much
okay.
above the air. Yes, I didn't feel at the time like I could do a properly bufnagle presentation of the topic, and I'm going to try my best to seek the good and be the good. And whatever the saying is now, you guys changed it on me, and I can't remember what it is. So I'm going to do my best to look on the bright side of this. But it's a difficult topic to talk about without pointing out all the problems.
Well, there are problems, right? And there are problems anytime you have big enterprises, lots of money, egos, machines, engineering, and space travel. So let's try to stick straight to what we know.
Sure,
Like
sure. This
let's
is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
We start with that, and we go from there. And the interesting thing here is so let's back up. Let's talk about the Commercial Crew program. So 10 years ago, NASA came up with this Commercial Crew program, and that was 3 years after the shuttle retired, and they wanted to get commercial companies to be able to deliver astronauts to the space station. All right, because the space station was, a long-term project for NASA, and currently it's approved to fly to 2030 or thereabouts, 2028, 2030, and so long as it continues to function well. And because it's getting old, it's been up there a long time. Yes,
but I'm not being exposed to the radiation and the space rocks that are
and the vacuum. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so wait. So NASA said about a decade ago that we are going to open up the delivery of people and goods to the space station, to International Space Station. We're gonna what's the word? We're gonna send it out to private enterprises, and they can bid on that, and if they can make it go, then they have the contract, right?
Yes, and the interesting,
and that's called Commercial Crew.
Yes, Commercial Crew. The interesting thing about these contracts is they were fixed price contracts rather than open-ended cost plus development contracts, and that's important here. So you had companies that responded to the request for proposals, and Boeing was one, and SpaceX was another. There was another one that I was rooting for, but didn't get selected. So the companies made their proposals, and their proposals included how much it was going to cost.
Right.
How much they wanted to be paid for this, for developing this spacecraft and this capability. And the way the contract was set up was there would be 2 development flights, 2 test flights, and then following that would be operational flights. So there would be one uncrewed flight to the space station, followed by a crewed test flight, and which also served as a certification flight. And then following that would be operational missions.
So that just off the top of my head here, that seems a little. I'm just wondering, does that seem like not enough testing? But I can see both ways. I can see we've been doing rockets a long time now. We have rockets generally work out, but actually getting a vehicle to the space station with people inside alive.
Alive and returning them alive.
Right. That's probably where this extra testing stuff starts. The rubber hits the road here.
Well, if you look back at, say, for example, Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo, when the United States was developing the capability to fly humans in space, we took less large steps. We made more incremental steps to develop capabilities. We didn't land on the moon on the second Apollo crewed space flight. We had Apollo 7, Apollo 8, Apollo 9, Apollo 10, and Apollo 10 was a dress rehearsal that did everything except land on the moon before Apollo 11 actually landed on the moon. And even then, during that landing, during that 12-minute maneuver to land on the moon, that was the part that hadn't been tested in the previous flights, there were things that happened that nearly caused that landing to be not successful. And it all comes back to software. Back then, it was related to software, and that's an interesting story on its own.
Yes,
which we can talk about another time when we want to reminisce about Apollo, maybe the 60th anniversary. I don't know, but
okay,
another 5 years.
Yeah, so, you know what? That's another 250 episodes, and
there you go.
My beard will be longer then. All right.
Yes. So yes, for someone who's seen that, it does seem like, one uncrewed flight, and then operational flight seems a little thin on the testing.
But that was the requirement. You have to do at least one and one.
I believe. I don't remember the details. It was a fairly long time ago, basically both of the contractors, and I said Boeing was one and SpaceX was the other that won the contract. Boeing bid like $4.2 billion for theirs, and SpaceX bid something like $2.6 billion for theirs. And the interesting thing, and I read the document that the decision document. I actually read at the time that the decision document, and one of the ironies in hindsight is that Boeing was seen as the safe, reliable, solid choice in that document.
It was the leader in the clubhouse at the time was Boeing.
Well, and if you look, if you think about it this way, up till that point, Boeing, the company that was Boeing at that time, had through mergers all of the legacy of the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and Space Shuttle. The companies that did those spacecraft, human spacecraft, were all part of Boeing Space Division. So it would be an obvious conclusion to make to say, yeah, well, they have all that experience, and here's the SpaceX who's never flown crew before. Yeah, they would be the obvious choice, even though they were more expensive. They were viewed as the safe, reliable choice.
But Boeing has acquired that through mergers and acquisitions, and it's been decades, if not rounding up. It might be to centuries. If you round up.
No, it's not quite 50 years yet. But
is it not 50 years?
I guess it's no. You're right. It's close. Yeah, I mean, if you go
back to
mid 70s, if you go to the last vehicle they designed in the 70s was the Space Shuttle. Space Shuttle was designed, with drawing boards, not CAD, with drawing boards and guys and gals, presumably gals as well, but maybe not, drawing on their drawing boards, drawing every piece of that spacecraft, which is, when I think about it, amazing. It's amazing that they were able to design that spacecraft
with pen and ink.
Pencils. I'm sure it was pencils.
Well,
I had drafting class in high school. Yes.
Well, I got back from architecture class, and every drawing we did was with paper and pencil. And then some people got bold. I mean, these guys were so good, Bob. They were so good.
I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah, they but some of them added ink. They went over their pencil with ink, and I was like, holy cow.
Wow, that's brave.
I have trouble even putting more pencil. And I had an eraser. It just took so long.
When I was in drafting class in high school, the most common thing on my drawings was the letters LQ in red, which is to say line quality, which is to say not acceptable line quality.
Well, this for another day. These guys were great, but I do understand the desire to use the CAD, and I understand the desire to draw it by hand too. So, all right, so decades ago, centuries, if you round up to the nearest century,
it's century. more than 50
then
years.
It's a long time since these companies did this thing, and
Yes.
and some of those people, some have moved on.
They've retired. They've moved on. Yeah, literally and figuratively. Yes. So SpaceX, on the other hand, and this is the interesting part, SpaceX actually ended up being the more experienced company because they had a previous contract not for commercial crew, but for commercial cargo. So they've been flying since 2012 uncrewed spacecraft, the uncrewed version of Dragon, the original version of Dragon, Dragon 1, to the International Space Station. And they've done it, I don't know how many times, 20, 30. They've done it some large number of times. And they do it routinely, and they've made it look routine. And that is, it's fully automated. They go up, they get to the space station, and then the crew on the space station goes in there, unloads the cargo, and then if they need to send stuff back, science experiment results, things like whatever, trash,
laundry.
Although they tend to put trash in the spacecraft that don't return to Earth, that burn up in the atmosphere. So
that's fair.
Yeah, because as we've talked before, they don't have a laundry machine. They wear clothes until they're not wearable anymore, and then they put them in a bag so they don't have to smell them, and they put on new clothes. And quite honestly, I'm fairly certain that I wouldn't last a day in the space station.
You think it smells like a really bad locker room?
I want to know. I would love to ask the question: when you fly up and you're in this clean smelling spacecraft that just launched,
does it smell like a new car in the spacecraft?
Yeah, one would imagine. I don't know.
Okay.
You've
been in the shuttle.
My experience was, when I worked there in late 1985, I got there before the Challenger accident, and we talked about that in very early episodes of the Buff. I had the occasion to crawl around on the flight deck of the two endpoints, the brand newest shuttle we had at the time, which was Atlantis OV-104, which is now in a retirement home at the Kennedy Space Center, and Columbia OV-102, which was the oldest one at the time. And the difference was striking. I can't I don't recall any like off smells, but I do actually, yeah. But I do recall how much more beat up the inside of the flight deck of Columbia looked compared to this brand new Atlantis that had only flown once. It was just one of those memories I have that was like,
what beats up the interior of a spacecraft? Is it when it's on land and getting serviced and prepped
and also up on orbit? I mean, it's everything. It's just everything. And in fact, that was before they started doing these maintenance periods where they would take that vehicle offline and bring it up to current standards and refurbish stuff. So presumably all those paint chips and things got fixed. I didn't stay there until after one of those, so I didn't see what it looked like after it came back from a major maintenance period. But presumably they applied paint to the paint chips. I would hope so.
It gets all tricked out, and they upgrade all the things, and they put in new.
Yeah, that was when they did things like they replaced the old cathode ray tube CRTs with liquid crystal displays, things like that. They replaced the computers that had the ferrite core donut memories with modern semiconductor memory. That was actually something that right after I left, that process started.
Right.
Yeah. So, anyways,
All right. So the space. Let me see if I can summarize where we are right now, because I think we're off track.
because we have gone a little off track. That
Right,
never happens to us normally.
Okay. So
as the listeners well know,
Boeing seemed like the safe bet, but they really hadn't done it in a while. SpaceX actually had recent experience with unmanned missions, and spaceships can get pretty beat up with people inside them because we're kind of grimy.
Yes, it ain't pretty.
Okay.
So,
all right.
That's a good summary. Fair enough.
Yeah, thanks.
So moving on. To get to the Starliner. So SpaceX, both companies experienced technical difficulties developing. There were also Congress chose to short this program early on with development money, so that stretched things out as well. And there were technical issues, and some of those technical issues were fairly severe. But eventually, SpaceX in 2020, in May, flew their first crew after flying an uncrewed mission. I don't remember exactly when, but they flew the first crewed test flight in May, and then following that, I don't remember if it was the same year. It was maybe 6 months or 9 months later they started flying operational missions.
So just to make sure that people were still coming and going to the space station, but they were flying out of Kazakhstan
They were on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft, which
for over a decade, right? For
a very long time, right around a decade.
All right, okay.
And that was tough. So and it became obviously more untenable as relations between the countries soured for a number of reasons.
Yep.
Anyways, so SpaceX did that. Meanwhile, Starliner's first uncrewed flight was a complete failure.
Okay, Starliner, that's the Boeing one.
That's the Boeing spacecraft Starliner. Their first uncrewed flight flew, and immediately after it separated from the launch vehicle, had problems. It began tumbling. The maneuvering thrusters were firing to try and orient it in a way that it wasn't supposed to be oriented. Long story short, it was a software problem. As I said before, it always goes back to software. And I will sidetrack just a little bit here.
Oh, we can't have that.
No, the result, the end analysis of this particular error, which cost it the mission. Once they finally got it under control, they didn't have enough maneuvering fuel to go to the space station, which was the primary mission of this flight. So they had to do a curtailed mission in lower Earth orbit, and so while that shortened 2-day mission was flying, they looked at all the rest of their software to make sure there weren't any other latent problems.
Might as well check now.
And oh, by the way, they found another one that potentially could have caused when the crewed part of the spacecraft separated from the support part of the spacecraft, the service module as it's called. When the crewed module separated from the service module, there was a potential they had wrong parameters in there, and there was a potential that they could have contacted each other during the separation, which would have been a bad thing. And so that was only narrowly caught and fixed within hours of when the separation was planned.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was two bad things. And let me just say one thing about the main problem. It was a problem with communication between the launch vehicle and the spacecraft that caused the spacecraft or the launch vehicle. I don't remember now exactly what, but it was basically they weren't on the same time. And so when the spacecraft separated, it thought it should be somewhere else.
Okay.
and in a different orientation. So it started trying to go to that orientation. Okay, so here's
Okay,
where
wait,
I'm
wait,
going.
I got to stop here.
Okay, you do that, and you do that, and I have a rant that goes with this. So
Okay.
you ask the question.
Okay, 100 years ago, when I was in graduate school,
Yes, long time
we
ago.
got 3 new. I think they might have been Next servers. They were some kind of computer services.
Yeah, that
do
sounds
stat
about
stuff.
right.
Yeah, okay. And of course, they were named Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
Of course,
because that's what are you going to call?
When I had 2 dogs, I named them Mo and Larry.
Yes, you did, but you needed 3 more dogs.
I know. No, I didn't.
Well, and there was so this was the early days of computing, and I remember this. I was a grad student, and a very strange thing. What you would do is you would log into one of your they weren't all equivalent. Huey, Dewey, and Louie. One of them was more powerful, and you wanted to run your software on that. But the other ones
knew the power of the dark side.
Yeah, the ones that had that you could use, like the weak computers, you could use just for like line editing or sending email and low grade stuff. But when it came time to do with heavy duty computing, you wanted to run them on the other server. So, and I don't know exactly how it was set up. Looking back at it now, I realize I don't really know where it was. But what you would do is I would open 2 windows on the screen, and I would edit in one of the windows, and then I would toggle over to the other window and essentially hit run. Right? You had to compile and link the libraries, do all this other kind of junk. But you would edit on one computer, and you would execute on the other computer, and there was a file server in the back somewhere doing something. Okay. And it turns out that if you would go really quickly from the editing window over to the running window, and you were pretty quick with your keyboard, you could actually, they weren't synced. Okay. And you would be asking the computer, the executing computer, to run the file before the other one had actually written it.
Because it was slower.
Well, no, it was in the past. It was
okay.
And so it didn't read. So you would make a change. You'd go over here. You'd run it, and the change wouldn't show up.
Oh, that would be maddening.
Oh, it was insane. And I was like, well, this. And so I said to myself, okay, this is new. Okay, this was 89, something like that. And people were figuring out how to do network computing.
Disk drives weren't that fast back then.
Oh yeah. So I was I was willing to concede that. My whole life has been this same problem of the clocks not being synchronized. And I don't, I just don't understand why it's so hard to synchronize clocks. And here you're telling me now that these 2 pieces of software, the clocks basically weren't synchronized, and that almost caused the spacecraft to crash, not in 1962.
No.
But in 2020.
Well, the 1962 spacecraft didn't have
all those clocks. All right, sorry, rant over. Sorry.
Anyways, that's your rant. Now my rant is this: is that this is something that would have been found if they had done an integrated test of the launch vehicle and the spacecraft, but they didn't do that. Okay,
so why not?
And this is where the rant comes in, because there was a time during my career where I was in the automotive industry, in the embedded software industry, part of the automotive industry, working on things like anti-lock brakes and chassis control, that sort of thing. The controlled braking that keeps your car on the road when it's slippery out. It's a wonderful thing. But so I spent a lot of time in that during my career, and I did spend some time doing tests of those boxes that did those functions. And so one of the things I did when I was in that test, I had that test responsibility, was I collected articles and failure reports for spacecraft and space flights that had software problems. And there's some really famous ones. The Ariane 5, which was the first flight of Ariane 5, which is a long time ago now, but that's the European Space Agency's, that was their workhorse rocket for a long time, more than a decade, I'm sure. But the first flight of that thing had a problem, and it failed. It went up and it went boom. It went sideways and it went boom. And the reason for that was amazing. You can look this up, but short story is they carried over the one of the navigation units. I think it was the inertial measurement unit. Mm-hmm. So they carried that from the Ariane 4, which was the previous version, the very successful rocket, and they they just carried it over. It already worked. They would launch, but there was one problem with that, with carrying it over. The flight profile of the Ariane 5 was more aggressive immediately after launch. And the viewers can't see this, but I'm making my hand and my arm go up in the air like the rocket. And the Ariane 5 had a more aggressive flight profile. And so it had some higher rate of motion as it left the launch pad.
Okay.
Well, it turned out, it's always software. It turned out that there was a variable. Please. No. Please. There was a variable in the carried over measurement unit in the navigation unit software. There was a variable, and you know what I'm going to say? It overflowed.
Yes, of course it did.
The variable overflowed.
It was a 2K problem.
The variable overflowed, and yet again, it was because they had this unit worked. It worked, but they never ran it against the new flight profile. Okay, two more examples.
Okay, yeah. Please go.
98, 99. The Mars opportunity at that time, NASA launched 2 science probes. One was a lander to land near the pole of Mars. I think it was the South Pole. And the other was an orbiter. They launched those 2. They were both lost. Okay.
I think I remember why this was.
Lost as in not, they were misplaced. Lost as in lost at sea, lost in space, lost. Mission failed, mission lost, that kind of lost.
Tell me why, Bob.
Okay. So there were 2. And I don't know which one. I'm going to start with the orbiter. The orbiter. This is great. Okay, so the orbiter failed because the orbiter actually came too close to Mars on its closest approach, where it was going to fire its engine to go into orbit. It actually came too close, and it came too close because NASA JPL was using metric units. And the contractor who was in control of the flight up till that point was using English units.
Yeah.
And so there was a discrepancy in how close the spacecraft was to the planet. Because of that, these correction factors, one, it was in English units, but interpreted as metric units or vice versa. I don't remember which. And it just ran into the Mars atmosphere.
So did they never know that they were using different units, or did they say, we use these units, we'll just convert them on the way?
I don't know. I don't remember. I read that report a long time ago. It was over 20 years ago I read that report. But that's not the best one. This is the best one. The lander, and it goes back to the same theme. The lander failed because, so you're coming down and you're coming down on rocket engines, and you burn, and you want to turn the engines off when you get to the ground. Okay? Yeah. So you don't bounce. You want to turn those engines off. Well, so the software in the lander was programmed so that when the accelerometers sensed the landing, they would turn off the engines. So when it failed at basically, we're waiting for the landing, you're waiting for the landing, and then we heard nothing from it. And eventually we get one of the orbiters to fly over. And it's like, oh, look there's a pile of debris where the lander was supposed to be. And it turns out that the engines turned off when the landing legs extended, which happened before landing,
before it hits the ground.
Before you get to the ground, while the engines are burning, they extended the landing legs. And it turned out, and this again, because they didn't do an integrated test, which would have uncovered this. They didn't do an integrated test with the hardware to know that the engines would shut off because of the acceleration force that would register on the accelerometers when the landing legs opened up and locked into position.
That was enough to trigger it.
That was enough to trigger the software that was waiting for landing, and it shut off the engines and it fell the rest of the way. And
how far do you think it fell?
I don't remember what it was. It was
okay, so
in not insignificant time.
We did one more. Okay.
Okay.
We did in clinical, when you do clinical trials, you try to get a drug approved in industry. Mm-hmm. You do lots of studies, lots and lots of studies. And then you do a thing called an integrated summary of safety, where you take all of the studies together and you say, we ran 62 different trials and we had, 75,000 patients or whatever. And you have kind of a pooled gigantic analysis of all the safety data. And one job I had was to pool these data together and compute. This is very early in my career. Compute I think it was the BMI, the body mass index for these patients. So all you need is height and you need weight. And we had to compute. And we found, I forget exactly what the thing was. We found, when we went through the individual studies, we found let's call it a dozen patients whose BMI changed by more than, I don't know, 20% or 100% or they met some threshold. Okay. But then when we pooled the data and did the same analysis, now we got I forget the number, 19 patients who now met the threshold. And in fact, the 19 wasn't just a superset of the 12. There were some that were, and we're like, how in the world can this happen?
How can this be?
How can this happen? And so it turns short story.
Yes, because we're already way along.
Over the short stories. This episode is going to be called something like "Short Stories in a Long Episode." It's going to be
There'll be a part two. It's the only thing I can figure.
Over the course of years of development of these different studies, there had been different programmers involved in computing the BMI. Okay. And how do you compute BMI? Well, you have to take, I forget what it is, but something like it's mass divided by body area or something like that. So you need height and you multiply, there's a formula, right? Yeah. But you need weight you need to compute body weight in kilograms. And we can talk about whether it's mass or weight. But there's a conversion between pounds and kilograms.
Yes.
And it turns out over the course of all those other studies, because I went in and I looked.
Yeah, you were going to find out where
I was going to find out. And I found the source code that converted the pounds to the kilograms, or the kilograms to pound. I forget what it was. There were at least 7 unique conversion factors that were used.
No.
And it's something like it's something like 9/5. So that the fraction is like 9/5 for pounds and kilograms. And sometimes it was 9/5. And sometimes it was 1/5/9. And sometimes it was 0.4545. Sometimes it was 0.45. Sometimes it was, and there were all those different ways you can do it. And obviously, if you're computing, you're going to get subtly different answers for those things.
Yes.
And then if you use those numbers in further calculations, any issues you have will get carried along. And it took weeks to find this. And I went through every one of those pieces of code and I found every one of them. And then we had to write a little paragraph.
You had to write.
It's like, here's why it doesn't add up. And it's the same thing. And because you never think to yourself, well, how are you going to convert pounds to kilograms? It's like, I'll just use the conversion factor. It's like, well, which one?
Yeah.
It is. Okay. So back to rockets.
Okay. Yeah. So we're still talking about the first uncrewed Starliner flight. So we're gonna try and skip ahead. That did successfully land. Then Starliner, because it was a failed mission, NASA asked Boeing to refly that flight. And one of let me just step back. One of the things that was noticed on the first flight, but it was explained away, was there were problems with the thrusters.
Thrusters? Oh.
But they explained it away because, with all the tumbling and stuff, they were overworked. And so it was because of that.
Yeah.
Right. So then they flew the second uncrewed flight, the reflight of the uncrewed flight. and that also had thruster problems. So now it's like, okay, well, now we actually have to really think about this.
Fool me once, fool me twice, right?
Yeah. And then and so that took some time, and then there were other problems that they had to deal with that delayed them well past. I mean, SpaceX is now preparing to fly their 9th operational crew segment, and Boeing is yet to fly crew up and down yet. And so that brings us to this current Starliner flight that launched in June, and that was the crewed test flight, crewed certification flight, and the crew went up, and while they were going up, they had what? Thruster problems again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Go figure. And so they were able to get control enough, with the crew helping out. It wasn't the crew had to intervene to help get them the rest of the way, but they made it to the space station, to the ISS. And that's when then, NASA and Boeing started digging into, well, why did this happen? And then they did something which was really amazing to me, which was, oh, there were these other tests we can run. And I remember reading that and going, on the ground, we can do these other, there were tests they could do up, at the space station.
Right.
They did some tests with the thruster engines. But then they also said, well, we're going to delay it even more, the crew returning. The crew was only supposed to be up there for like 8 days, and then they were going to return.
And now, as of our recording here, they are still up there on the space station.
They are up there on the space station. Yes. And the Starliner is not. The Starliner came home, and NASA made that choice in August. Mm-hmm. They made the call because they were not confident enough
to put those people on board.
Yeah. Boeing's explanation to bring them back, because if they had a failure that was bad enough, that could have been not just loss of mission, loss of crew. So Boeing Boeing felt, and they presented to the NASA review board, they presented the position that it was safe to fly. Okay. And NASA's decision was unanimous. No, we're not putting our crew on that.
No, it did turn out that the Starliner got back to Earth safely.
Yes, there were a couple of problems that occurred. New problems, in addition to 2 of the thrusters on the service module had problems. There was one thruster on the crew part that never fired, and then there was a navigation. One of the 3 redundant navigation GPS, I think it was, sensors that had to be reset while it was flying. It didn't immediately come online. So those are 2 things they're going to have to look at. But basically, the crew stayed on board the space station, and now what is happening is SpaceX is flying the Crew 9 operational mission, and NASA had to take 2 astronauts off of that mission. So it will fly up with only 2 of its 4 crew to the space station. And then the 2 astronauts from the Starliner will now become part of that crew's operational increment, and they will be there till either February or March.
Oh, really? That long?
Yes. So they they're going to serve the whole operational increment in place of the 2 crew that were taken off of the Crew 9 flight.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's significant. But, I give NASA credit for making the decision they made. I take away some credit in the style of, Harry Potter.
Sure.
I take away some credit that they launched in the first place with problems.
Right.
So
we should have a talk sometime about what it is that makes their thrusters specifically prone to these problems.
Part of the reason NASA said they didn't want to fly crew on it was they don't have they don't have a full explanation. They know it's happening from the tests they did on the ground. They know what's happening, but they don't know why.
Why?
And so there's a difference between, yes, we know this happens if we do this, but we still don't understand why it's happening. And that's a bad thing. That's a bad place to be.
And the question is it mechanics or is it software?
This one is more like heat and heat accumulation in the housings that the thrusters are in.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So the astronauts are still safe. They're stuck in the locker room till the early part of next year. But that's what they do, right? So
yeah, they signed up for this, and this was one of the things that could have possibly happened. And they did train for being part of
for that mission,
this crew. So they did train for that. So it was something they knew could happen.
All right. Well, let's hope and pray everything goes well when they go to get them and to continue that mission. So when will that launch be?
That launch is scheduled for 3 days from now.
So by the time this drops, we will know.
Yes, it will already presumably have gone and hopefully successfully docked with the space station.
Wow.
And,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, we will see. When this drops, we'll find out how the predictions went, and hopefully all will be well. Bob, as always, we are deeply indebted to you for your expertise and, more than that, your lovely demeanor here on the Buff. We appreciate you.
I took the high road on this.
Yes.
So actually talking about the different ways software can go bad was fun.
It is. It is so hard. It is so hard to do. Right?
Even as much as it just, I shake my head when I think about it.
Well,
anyways,
there we are.
Yes.
Well, so they're still safe, and let's hope when this drops, the next crew is there and preparing these guys for their mission and their return home in the early part of 2025. Yes. Bob, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for asking me. And as always, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'll be happy to do it whenever you need me.
We will. I'm sure we'll have you again before the end of the year. Thank you very much. As to the rest of you, we will encourage you, as we always do, to seek the good, live virtuously and flourish, and enjoy the adventure of life.
It's going to be a great day.